People often ask, what can the Cleveland branch and NAACP do for them? Today, you'll find out. All right, welcome. I am ecstatic to welcome you to 2026, our first Cleveland Pulse podcast of the year. And I have a very special guest for you today. Today we have attorney Angela Groves, who is a phenomenal civil rights attorney that I have the distinct pleasure of working with on a day in and day out basis at the Cleveland branch. I want to welcome you, Angela.
Thank you, Edwin. Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure working with you over the past. It's been over a year now.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking, the first time we met when we were talking about the work I would do for the branch, you mentioned this podcast. So it's very cool to see how it's come to fruition. So congrats to you for making it happen.
We're finally here.
Yeah.
So first, tell them a little bit about what you do. You're a civil rights attorney by trade. You've done a lot of things. But I just want you to kind of give the audience a little bit about, what you've done as your profession. What is a civil rights attorney and what do you do with the Cleveland branch?
Sure. So I'm a civil rights attorney. I use a movement lawyering approach in my work. So we'll talk more about what that means. But really, I do lawyering in support of social movements. And my work really focuses on racial justice and education justice. And so I use my skill set, my training as a civil rights attorney to support community organizations in their advocacy on those issues, specifically related to racial justice. So I support, in my private practice, I support a group of community organizations. And prior to this, I've worked at a civil rights law firm in DC, and I worked at a civil rights nonprofit organization. And so I bring those experiences to work now with the organizations that I support.
What makes you so passionate about civil rights law?
I think a lot of it is my upbringing. I was raised by two civil rights attorney and now a judge. And so these conversations about justice and equality, they were just baked into my upbringing. My parents, looking back now, they were organizing around our school district and making sure that Black students were supported. And those meetings happened in our living room. So we're like, there's a Caring Communities meeting today. Mom and Dad are going to have their, to us, their friends over and they're going to be doing, stuff about the schools. And so that was just baked into how I was raised. And then my faith plays a role in what brings me to this work, feeling a sense of purpose that, especially when we've been giving opportunities, that we have an obligation to do something to ensure that those opportunities are extended to others. In my own family, I've seen both the progress of the civil rights movement and racial justice, and also the areas where there's still so much more progress to be made. So seeing, I think, both the opportunity and the need for continued work is what motivates me and gives me the passion to do this work.
What I think is also special about something that you said is being exposed to the work so early on, having parents that worked in that space and as an adolescent kind of see what's going on. So you actually are seeing issues happening. You're living with the problem solvers and people who are actually actively working to make a difference in the lives of these individuals, and then have an opportunity to go and pursue it yourself, and then work alongside your parents and others in that field. I just think is a phenomenal thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful for it.
And the other thing about civil rights is there is no shortage.
There's such a need. There's such a need.
So, you and I, we talk about this all the time, and a lot of people don't necessarily understand, when it comes to civil rights. People call our office. We have various complaints about various things, but I want to talk today about what does a civil rights complaint look like? So let's talk maybe about the complaints that we get, and then let's talk about the actual complaints that we actually work on.
Yeah. And I can give you, asked initially what my work is, and I gave you the general overview, but the work that I do with the branch, my role is civil rights consulting attorney. And so part of my role is reviewing the complaints that come in, and then also supporting the civil rights advocacy legacy of the branch supporting the leadership, yourself, our president, the executive committee on civil rights issues that we'll take a stance on. So the complaints are one part of my work, and a civil rights complaint. So there are a lot of different types of wrongs and things that people have experienced. Unfortunately, the branch can't address every wrong that's happened to people. I think a lot of times people don't realize they hear the NAACP, and so they think there's this massive operation, which is great. It shows the legacy of the name of the NAACP, but there are 2 full-time staff at the branch. So I try to remind folks that it's not a law office. I'm so grateful to be able to support the work. So there is legal support. But it's, my role is coming in as a consultant, and there's not this whole team of attorneys, unfortunately, who are able to work full time on the complaints that come in. And so when we're looking at the complaints, when they first come in, there's 2 things that we're screening for. First, really, and most importantly, is whether there's some allegation of race discrimination, right? So the work of the branch, its legacy really is in racial justice work, pursuing freedom for people of color and Black people specifically. And so the complaint needs to allege that there's something specific about race that played a role in the harm that the person who's filing the complaint experienced. So, things like general criminal defense, although we know race plays a huge role in the criminal legal system, but we don't do criminal defense work through the office. And the office is not a legal office. And we'll talk about what types of support we're able to provide. But there needs to be something specifically mentioned about race in the complaint that gives it a chance to be something that we can support, and that our resources are best aligned to be able to support. And then the other thing we're looking at is just the location of where it occurred. So the Cleveland branch of the NAACP serves Cuyahoga County, but it doesn't serve outside. So something that happened in Lake County, something that happened somewhere else, Columbus, we're going to ask you to go to that branch. This branch is not able to do anything in support in those cases. Yeah.
So, you hit the nail on the head. We receive so many complaints, and people don't necessarily understand what exactly, we do, but that's a clear case, race discrimination, race-based discrimination. Mm-hmm. All right. Would you like to talk a little bit about maybe some of the cases, maybe the recent things that we got involved in?
Yeah, so we've, if I think about some of our more recent statements, the police chases. So that actually didn't come in through a complaint specifically, but part of my role and part of the work of the branch is keeping up to date on the present civil rights issues that are happening locally in our community. And so unfortunately, there have been multiple bystanders, innocent bystanders who have been killed as a result of police chases that were happening either in the city of Cleveland or in Cuyahoga County. And so recently, in the past, let's say few months, the branch put out a statement really calling for a moratorium and a change to the policy around police chases, really restricting when those chases can occur, and advocating for more restrictions to protect the community. And so the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department did change their policy after our organization and many other organizations came and called for a change in that policy. So that's one of the things that the branch has looked at in my role, looking at some research around that, looking at best practice, saying that at the very least, chases should not begin unless there is suspicion of a felony. And in one of the high profile cases, that was not the case. The suspicion was essentially a DUI. And so our stance would be, no, that doesn't warrant the risk that's posed to the rest of the community around that issue. Another recent statement that the branch put out was around the policy of Cleveland Clinic for individuals. There was some great reporting by Signal, the news channel here, and found that uncovered this policy that anyone who brings someone to the ER who has a gunshot wound, there's actually a policy that says that that person, regardless of how they ended up there, a family member, someone who's just looking to do good, that they are to be detained related to that that incident. And so the branch has come out in saying, this poses harm to people seeking medical care, can have a disproportionate impact on the Black community that's disproportionately affected by gun violence in Cleveland, and that this is not a good policy for the sake of our communities. So those things didn't necessarily come in through the complaint system, but they were issues, local issues that the branch was keeping an eye on and put statements out about.
No, I mean, and I think that makes sense. I want to walk through a couple of scenarios, and I feel like you give them pretty clear examples, but I want people to be crystal clear, right? And so if you are at work and you feel like you've been discriminated against at your place of employment, can I submit a complaint?
You can always submit a complaint. We'll do our best to review it. What we'd be looking at, so we have not really taken on an individual issue around an employer in recent history that I can remember. But if there were a case where you were subject to ongoing discrimination, and not just you, but maybe a whole group of people, where your boss was saying multiple racist things about, Black people or people of color. They said specific things to you, and you have, you're able to speak to those things that were specific about race. That would be something that we would at least follow up on. And especially if there are other people who've had similar experiences, that would be something that we would look into and investigate and see if there's any support that we can provide. The branch is in those instances, even if we were to take on supporting someone in that or playing a role regarding that incident, we would not be your lawyer. So we would be looking at most likely providing referrals and seeing if there are ways for the branch to maybe make a statement or send a letter. So it would be unlikely, I think, in most cases that the branch would be able to support. But if it's a widespread issue and our investigation shows that this looks like it's a widespread issue, it might be something where we look into whatever legal resources we can refer you to, and then see how we can support your advocacy around that.
And it's always been my understanding that like racial discrimination is very hard to prove.
Yes.
So if it's somebody, just a word of advice to somebody out there who may be experiencing those things like that, at least my first inkling would be to tell you is to record everything. But what else could a person do? And
you have to be careful about recording as far as, and I actually have to do the research in the state of Ohio. If single party recording is allowed, but record, like write it down. Yes. So keeping notes in your complaint, we have an online complaint system. So, the lawyer has like, I don't know if I want you going around. Don't put it on tape. Tape recording all your conversations. You got to be careful about the laws on that. But yes, when you submit a complaint, give us as much information as possible so that we can use that as we're doing our review.
And I think one of the eventual goals that I have is like to create a repository of other organizations that people can go to, because again, we get so many different complaints, things that maybe fall in domestic or other realms, but those people still need assistance. Yeah. Trying to get people to the right place is something that I think is really important to me, and always creating that line on, this is what a civil rights case is. These are what civil rights issues are. And unfortunately, I think most people don't understand what it means when we talk about what happens when a person's civil rights are being violated. Yeah.
And unfortunately, too, there is such a shortage of civil rights attorneys and organizations that are providing civil rights legal support, right? It's not, there's not a whole lot of money behind it to support it, but the need far outpaces the resources. And so that's part of why I do the work that I do. Part of why I do the work here in Cleveland is that I do feel like there absolutely is a need. And I wish there were a whole army of even more attorneys. We are small but mighty. But yeah, we have to use a lot of discretion in what issues we're able to actually invest our time and our resources in.
So something is like, funny because, growing up, I didn't know a lot of attorneys. Now, older as a professional, I have so many friends who are attorneys. I'm so fortunate to have so many intelligent people around me. But even many of us don't understand it. Like, there are so many different types of attorneys. You know, we want to ask a lawyer everything. Anything happens, you know, I went and ate something in a fast food restaurant. I got a stomach ache and I want to call you and ask you, Angela, even though you're a civil rights attorney, right? You know, so many different types of attorneys, and people need to understand, you know, the differences between the attorneys. But as it pertains to civil rights attorneys are game changers in the way that a lot of things that have happened in this country that have shaped it to allow people to have more rights than they've ever had before have come during the work of civil rights attorneys, especially when we think back to around the time of the civil rights movement and the NAACP being the oldest and largest civil rights organization in the country. Could you talk about like some of the feats that civil rights attorneys have overcome by working in that practice, right? And because of the work that civil rights attorneys have done, some of the freedoms that we share today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, some of what inspired me to want to go to law school, one of the cases, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, one of the most famous Supreme Court decisions in our country's history. There certainly has been a role that the courts have played, especially during the civil rights movement. That case was led by Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP. And a lot of times people don't realize there was a 20-year strategy. They started bringing cases in the 1930s, Charles Hamilton, Houston, Howard Law School, to build up to get to that point. So it was very strategic, the work that they were doing and the role that they brought the courts into play. But some of what movement lawyering, a critique that this latest iteration of movement lawyering brings is that it's not all about the lawyer. It's not all about the courts. Lawyers can play a role, but especially if we look at school desegregation and the civil rights movements, lawyers played an important role. Civil rights lawyers played an important role. The court did its part, but it really was people power that created this change. And lawyers came in and played a part alongside organizing, alongside communities, alongside everyday people who were doing their part, who were marching in the streets, who were boycotting, offering whatever they could in support of people who were boycotting, to come together and make this social, be a part of this social movement that made this incredible progress. So it's not, all our eggs are not in the basket of the courts. It's not all, civil rights lawyers are not a hero coming in on a cape, even if we want to think of ourselves that way. It really is the power of communities. It's the power of organizing, and lawyers come in support of that. So yes, we have played significant roles in some of these landmark cases, especially in the 1960s, 1950s. The courts are different now, right? The Supreme Court today is not the Supreme Court of 1954. Many would argue if that case came before the court today. And even there are some who are questioning the foundations of a Brown v. Board, the legal foundations, and daring to question whether those types of decisions should stand. So, in some instances, the courts have been helpful to our movements. In other instances, the courts have upheld racial segregation, have upheld a lot of things that we know today are absolutely wrong. Cases like Plessy versus Ferguson in the 1890s that said separate but equal is okay, right? And the Brown v. Board overturned that. So I don't put all my eggs in the basket of the courts. I don't put our freedom entirely in the courts. I think we really have to recognize the power of communities and be strategic about how civil rights lawyers can stand in support.
I appreciate that. So in that understanding, how could a person in general protect their own civil rights?
So I think being informed about your rights, one of the things that the branch did this summer, we had a wonderful attorney from the ACLU come and do a Know Your Rights presentation. There are a lot of resources now today. I know on my social media account, I'm always resharing things from ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, that share with people what your rights are when you're protesting, or what your rights are as it relates to the police. So I think being informed, going to those Know Your Rights trainings when you have the opportunity, reaching out, becoming a part of organizations like the NAACP Cleveland branch, the more that you're in spaces with community where people are talking about current issues, the more you're going to be exposed to what your rights are and things that you can do to stand up. But I think being very aware of what's going on around you, staying engaged in community organizations, and then speaking up, right? If something, I don't want to, we want to be clear about things that the branch can help with when it comes with complaints, but I also don't want to discourage people from thinking, okay, I don't know, maybe this doesn't apply, so I shouldn't, reach out. Like, reach out. We'll let you know if it's not something that we can help with. We'll try to advise you on what your rights are. But I think staying informed, staying engaged is a great way to start.
So a couple of questions, a couple of fun questions.
Okay.
And being a civil rights attorney, I understand that the work can be heavy. Yeah. How do you keep yourself from becoming jaded?
That's a good question. And this, I was reflecting on 2025, like watching the news on New Year's Eve of just all of the things that happened in 2025, all of the rollback of our rights, the attack on civil rights. This is a tough time right now. We're fighting for things that we thought were established, that we thought wouldn't be questioned. But I think what stops me from being jaded is being in community, being around people who are still showing up, who are still doing the work day in and day out, people like yourself, people who come to the NAACP meetings every month, who are offering what they can, people who are out protesting. I think when we isolate ourselves and just sit and watch the news and stay on the couch and don't do anything, that takes away hope. But when you're actually engaged, when you're doing the work, when you're trying to do something, I think that brings hope because you're working with others and you're seeing, okay, it's not just me. There are other people who care about these issues. Some way or another, we're going to make it through. And I do, I talked a little bit about family history and how important that is for me. All of my grandparents, four of my grandparents were a part of the Great Migration. So they were born in Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, on farms. Their parents were, one of my grandparents, his parents were sharecroppers. And so they had hope enough to say, we're going to look to find another way. Maybe we won't get to experience it, but our children will experience it. And so the hope that they had, the things that they experienced in the 1930s, the 1940s in the Jim Crow South, these may be rough right now, but they are not what they were at that time. There has been a lot of progress. So I think having a historical perspective, and that's some of what this current administration and others want to take away from us, is that historical perspective. But when we have a historical perspective of what, especially as Black people, our communities, our ancestors, our family members have overcome, for us to be sitting here in this beautiful studio having this conversation with the education that we've been able to attain, when we think about the progress that's been made, within our family lineage and people that we knew, I think that helps me to stop from being jaded. Because it's like, well, how can I complain when my granny had to get on a train and come up to Cleveland and Detroit and other places just to have an opportunity to sit at the same lunch counter and ride on the same bus? So that helps me to stay away from being jaded.
I think it's always important to realize that we are living on the freedoms and standing on the shoulders of the generation past.
Yes.
So many people made sacrifices for, so many people made sacrifices for us to be here. Mm-hmm. So many people gave their lives in order for us to have the freedoms that we have.
Yeah.
And it certainly can't be taken for granted. So I'm gonna give you a couple more fun questions.
Okay.
How do you maintain balance as an attorney?
Yeah, I mean, I've really been pushed with that, I saw another podcast where Jill Scott was talking about your 20s are for working hard, your 30s are for working smart, at the different stages of life. I think early in my career, I was grinding, like working a lot. And often as civil rights attorneys, if you're litigating, you're the underdog. And actually that is some of what draws me to the work too. Like, I want to use my resources on behalf of the people who don't have it all. Like, I'm going to add more value there than on the side of power and resources. So, there is some amount of a grind when you're in litigation. For now, we talk a lot about being parents. Gotten great advice from you about the life of, being an engaged parent. So now as a mom of a toddler, balance looks very different for me now than it did in my first couple years as an attorney, grinding and practicing in DC. So, I work part-time. And so that's part of how I manage that balance and manage my role as a mom and how I'm able to show up in the way that feels right for me, for my family, and for my son. So, I balance my hours in that way. Back in the day, I was a basketball player. I don't play ball much anymore, but I do yoga. I try to go for walks. Try to, while this work is very important, know that I plan to be a civil rights attorney for my entire career. I'm not looking for any other careers. And so if I want to be able to do this for the long run, if I don't want to burn out of this work, I have to create room for things that are not just work. So that's some of what has worked for me. And I think becoming a parent and becoming a mom has really pushed me to establish balance in a very different way than I did before.
So I appreciate your stance, and I appreciate your candor and just how you go about life. Because one thing I can say about you is like you're always positive, you're always smiling, you're always happy, and the work is heavy, right? And as a parent of two little Black boys myself, I found myself looking at them and watching the news and seeing what's happening in the world. And I become jaded sometimes. I become frustrated. I become worried.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, how can I make this world a safe place for my boys? With the constant changing and politics and the people trying to strip us of our rights in history, it is difficult for me. So you are a bright spot, and I appreciate the work that you do. One of my last questions is a very fun question I love to ask everybody. What's currently on your playlist right now to get you through the day?
I love my gospel music. Okay. That's what gets, as far as what gets me through the day. So my Spotify rap was heavily gospel, like Yolanda Adams, which is funny because my mom used to listen to Yolanda Adams, and I'm like, her music is really good. The Tasha Cobbs is one of my favorites. My Spotify Wrapped #1 was India Ari. So that balance, that calming kind of neo soul, that's sort of my vibe. I've had a lot more D'Angelo in my playlist after, his very tragic passing and going back to some of his classic albums. So soul, R&B, more so neo soul, R&B, gospel is what's on my playlist.
That's why you're so calm and cool all the time. You got a great playlist. Well, listen, Angela, it has been a blast. I have thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation with you today. I appreciate you coming out, and I'm more so appreciative of the work that you are helping us do. We need more people like you. And so what I want you to leave people with, if there are somebody watching you and maybe even interested in becoming a civil rights attorney, or a young person who never thought about it before, do you have a message for them?
Well, first, I do want to thank you for having me on. I want to thank the NAACP Cleveland branch for trusting me to do the work that I get to do with you all. I don't take it for granted. It really is. It's a mutual exchange of trust. And so I'm grateful to be able to do this work. For someone who's interested in becoming a civil rights attorney, do it, please. We need you. I remember when I was applying to law school, some people were kind of discouraging of like, oh, everyone says they're going to be a civil rights lawyer, but then they go corporate or they do X, Y, and Z. They don't actually do it. Some of that is because it's hard to get your foot in the door initially. But if someone feels like they have this passion and they have this interest, please pursue it. Do not give up. Do not let people discourage you. Times are rough in the courts right now. I would say continue to pursue your dream, and reach out to civil rights attorneys in your orbit. Reach out to me, reach out to others. I think it's really important to invest in the next generation. And I would say, think about how we can use the law creatively. I think right now we're at a moment where the day, like as I mentioned before, the days of Brown v. Board that's not the court that we have right now. And so one of the things I really appreciate about movement lawyering is that it's looking at using our legal skill set creatively. So it may not be filing a lawsuit in court. It may be writing a letter or doing some form of organizing or doing something that's outside of the box that uses your legal skill set. So I do still think a legal skill set is useful to have for the movement that we're supporting, but think about it creatively and keep going. Don't give up, because we need you in this work.
All right. Thank you. Well, you all heard it here first. For those listening out there, we thank you for tuning in. If I don't see you before the next time we record, do the best to take care of yourself, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Peace.